What's up, Embody? Today on the Yours Truly podcast, I have Luke, the Arkansas Rando, in the virtual studio. Luke recently reached out to me in an email. The subject line read, "An Arkansas Rando who would love to chat." He told me he's been a lurker in this little corner of the internet for years and has been on some of Luke Thompson's Whitestone Name / Grail Country live streams. He told me that he and his wife started going back to church a year or two ago after they had their twins. He also explained that they attend a very modern brand of evangelical church and that he's recently been exploring ideas around more traditional historical Christian church traditions and was interested in having that conversation. He wrote, "I'm really interested to hear about the church community you've developed and how you've integrated the treasures from Christian tradition. With us both coming from non denominational evangelical backgrounds in Arkansas, it seemed like we're in similar mindsets." I asked if he was up to making this my first official Randos conversation on the Yours Truly podcast, and he agreed. So, without further delay, I give you Luke, the Arkansas Rando. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. What's up, Luke?
Hey, Christian. How's it going?
It's good, man. So, you reached out to me on this email and it was like, whoa, a rando. I'm having a rando. That was fun. And it's fun, this language. I've got a few people in town that are tagging along on some of these. And when I'm talking to like my father-in-law, so when you say rando, that means, I'm kind of like explaining a little bit of jargon that we have floating around here. So yeah, man.
Yeah.
What made you cross the threshold? What was the impulse to reach out?
Yeah, just really the Arkansas connection. I feel like a lot of these internet relationships, just having something that kind of is that link to real life, it helps me for sure. And also just, I don't know, I've really been, attracted to just your conversational style. I feel like you're very, very personable, easy to talk to. And it was like, well, I bet Christian would, talk to me. And also there's just a lot I feel like we can relate on, kind of coming from evangelical world in Arkansas. You've been way more involved in church than I have, but I feel like, yeah, it'd be a good conversation. I think there are a lot of points of commonality between our
Sure.
stories.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I was wearing I wore some Arkansas shirts, and yeah, when you said Arkansas, we really did kind of feel a little different, like getting that kind of contact because it was like, oh, there's some identifying thing, and then you actually mentioned in the email the church you go to, and I was like, I have all sorts of history related to that,
Yeah.
and so there's you know, been up to your neck of the woods for certain sporting events and whatnot, and that kind of thing. So yeah, they carries all sorts of little bits of meaning than just being in the corner per se.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like it connects with, just some themes you've been talking about recently. Last night I was listening to the podcast you did with Luke Thompson, but about it being more than just ideas. And I think what I'm really interested in is talking about how these ideas really kind of touch down into my life. My family life, how we participate in a church community. Um, and I feel like there's just a certain um kind of like a flavor of kind of like evangelical Christianity in Arkansas that you're very familiar with, and I'm just kind of trying to find my place in that specific context that I feel like that really well. And I'm kind of like pulling in like all these big ideas, inspiration from kind of like Catholic tradition, and then inspiration from Orthodox, symbolic world stuff. And how can I integrate that with like where I'm situated, you know? in
Yeah.
in space time. And I feel like that kind of like that situatedness, you can relate to that. And also the big ideas. So it feels really relevant.
So, the unique part, I guess, for me is that I was in operating, um, like I had guys that were in my band that I travel with that like attended and were playing Sundays at the main campus of your church for like, so that kind of level of participation, you could say, and understanding of the ethos and what that means. And I actually had it'll come out later, but a conversation with a guy in this space. He goes by McMosif, McMo. I don't know if you've seen him around.
Yeah.
He was a program, like a program guy for a large church out in North Carolina, and so we kind of talked shop on some of the cultural side of what that experience is and what it means to be a part of that. And one of the things I was picking up from his conversation that I hadn't thought about in a while, because I had been technically like out of the game for a while, but by nature of being kind of on the front end of some of that movement, some of that experience is still relevant, I think. And one of the things he was mentioning was, and you're touching on this, is the lived out part of your Christianity. And in that very evangelical, very modern church, you're hearing these ideas, and the ideas are attached to very real things. And there's a threshold, and you're gonna at the current time, you're going to either continue to bump up it against that threshold or find ways to make that meaning. And some of that has to do with certain things like sacramental theology. Because it isn't just the place and the aesthetics and the history. It's also, and you were kind of doing this like, I want to I want to ground myself in my Christian faith or something like that. Am I tracking with you at all?
Yeah, 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 yeah. And I
Let me
think just
okay, go ahead.
go ahead.
So the thing
I,
that in the culture of evangelicalism, the way to participate in your faith is to serve.
yeah, yeah,
Like when I say that, it's loaded with get on the sound team, be a small group
yeah.
leader, uh, attend, maybe teach a class or uh, do small group, come to church, be a greeter. Like, and I think that that is, well, it's running thin over time and and up against a changing culture. Is that touching on it too?
Yeah. What I find is that in our kind of church context, there's a there's a really meaningful aspect where we feel embedded in like a real community, real genuine people who like have a genuine relationship with Christ in ways that like make sense for them and language that, makes sense for them. And there's with us having young kids, I mean, our twins just turned 3. There's just like a lot of overlap between, their kind of their kids day out program and then like having parents there who go to our church and just like a really like thick community, which is like super, super important and meaningful. But then I'm feeling like a sense of kind of a spiritual malnourishment in terms of not finding the kind of substantive uh like teaching, or I mean you could even say like the kind of the sacramental aspect of our evangelical context is just so hollowed out. It's just like a freaking it's just like a paper version, like a paper cutout version of what I think I've realized is in the Christian tradition. And so I'm not trying to like dismiss kind of our church context because it's so meaningful for us in a lot of ways. And like my in-laws go to our church, and so just like we with between my immediate family, my wife's family, we take up a whole row, and it's just such a beautiful thing to like be in church with your family. and have that shared experience. But then I just feel like I'm having to supplement what I get from like Sunday and small group. I'm supplementing that with like all of this symbolic world stuff. I'm supplementing it with, kind of following along with like the daily readings from the Catholic lectionary to really find myself like embedded in the Christian story, and to find myself situated in like the liturgical calendar. I'm supplementing it with like, praying the rosary, like kind of a budding devotion to Mary, like concepts of the divine feminine that are just totally lacking in the evangelical world. And I'm like, what? What am I? Like, I feel like I'm in this kind of in between space where, for a lot of family reasons, like it doesn't make sense to just like jump ship and like become Catholic. I mean, my wife has even told me very clearly that's not on the table. Um, but I'm like, I feel like feeling spiritually malnourished is like the best way to put it. I'm just like looking for kind of nourishment and inspiration in other places, but then it's kind of hard to like bring that into like my church context because, like there's an elder at a church who's like said things like, he doesn't think Catholics are Christian. Um, and so there's like this, it's like, you know, the people in my church context have like a much more narrow, smaller worldview. Like they kind of are much more exclusivist, and I'm not at all. I'm like, it's all good, it's all pointing to Christ. But it, that just leaves me where there are like kind of parts of my spiritual life I'm like just having a hard time integrating. Does that all make sense? Does that kind
Oh
of
yeah.
flesh things out?
Yeah, I think so. So a couple of thoughts, if I can hold on to them. There's your life and marriage and the family and the community aspect. There's the personal experience. There's the postmodern heading into metamodern version of your faith. So, yeah, so one of the things I think this is part of the meaning crisis. I mean,
Yeah.
I think this
Yeah.
is because, and part of it comes from, you know, this this apple that we bit off, all this knowledge, all this knowledge that we have access to, but we are accessing it as individuals at a very high pace as we can handle, even higher, really. And your wife's not I mean, it's not like y'all are sitting down at night watching the same TV show that's showing you this information and you're kind of like doing this together. No, it's like all day she might be listening to something, all day you might be listening to something, and her content is very different from yours and her needs and interests. And so, and then at the end of the day, y'all might watch a show together, but it's not like listening to Jonathan Peugeot talk about symbolic meaning in a icon or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the benefit in my life related to this thing, and I've shared this multiple times, is my wife's family history. Have you heard me mention that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what I've gathered is that like you've got Catholics and Lutherans on your wife's side of the family.
Yeah, like serious, big time. And so and her parents weren't just they were interesting because they were actually something I would consider evangelical. Not like there's an Elka Lutheran, which is like evangelical, like, but no, like they're American evangelicals that went to a Missouri Synod Lutheran church for a very long time. And that part of and part of that journey was actually from my mother-in-law seeking a more personal relationship with Jesus. Coming from her Catholic, it felt like there wasn't a lot of meaning in this experience that she had. Do these people really believe this chant? And I don't know about all this. And that's when her Mom was the secretary of the Catholic high school. Her brother was becoming a priest. Her two sisters were becoming nuns. Pretty big deal. My wife
Mhm.
ends up we meet in high school, and I'm come from charismatic Baptist, becoming reformed, end up being Presbyterian basically. And but we meet in high school and I'm doing the music stuff, and she sees what she sees in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod High Church as the same thing her mom kind of saw. And that all her Baptist friends had this like real, you know, real faith. It felt like something more real because they were going to youth group, they were singing these songs together, and they were going like these embodied things. That was so that's complicated because
Mhm.
but then I'm like so we're like meeting like low and high church like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and then we are a part of a body that's I'm a worship leader, and we do start integrating actual embodied liturgy. Pretty significant. It'd be like the church you go to adding a call to worship, adding a confession of faith, or every other week reading the Apostles' Creed, adding a prayer of illumination before, and then actually have like a formalized reading of the word. That which is like a Presbyterian liturgy. Um, and so that's been that. So I was leading that. I was putting that into a church. So we're coming at this from a little bit different spaces. However, um, what it sounds like with you as an individual, you're not just thinking about these things. You're embodying as you've been doing the rosary. You're praying some form of the hours and lectionaries, or using like that type of thing, and that is like an individual thing. But it sounds like when you get into that space, it's like, where does this land? And there's a disintegration of those things. But the community and the family aspect is actually a huge deal. It's not, we think that it's just getting the right belief, but it's not. Like, or just getting the right practice. It's a trueness of the whole. It's a trueness of the whole, of the integration of your life. And so the other piece that I would throw on there right now is just to also say that because I think if you're just getting started with kids and stuff, you're a few years younger than me. I'll be 40 next year, and to see that you don't have to make a decision right now, that you don't have to actually be in a hurry, and that maybe another element of this is to like, instead of like having this existential turmoil within yourself, being like, wonder what it'd be like to, what is a loving way to have conversation with my wife and not even try to convince her, not approaching it as I'm going to try to convince her to this, but like, or just doing this thing that you live out for a long time, that she just watches and she sees your faithfulness and your love for it. I mean, and instead of trying to convince her with the ideas about why Catholicism is a better way or something. There you go. Shooting from the hip here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, all that's super good. All that's super good. And yeah, I think I mean it might be helpful if you're interested. I could kind of just backtrack and like go over my story if
Yeah,
you'd like
man.
me
Let's
to,
let's rando
just
this
to give
thing.
you.
Let's rando this thing.
Yeah, 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 just to give you some more context. Yeah, so, born and raised in Northwest Arkansas. Um my my parents actually both came from Methodist backgrounds, and so I was in a Methodist church, like up until sometime in middle school, like did Awanas and stuff like that. But then there's like something in the church that led my parents to leave, and then they found like a very small kind of like startup non-denominational evangelical church that definitely had like charismatic elements. I mean, like extended worship, drum circles,
Hmm.
people run around the sanctuary waving flags. And we were in this like building, it was still under construction. Like it was like so DIY, you know, grassroots, but I really loved it. I mean, like the people there were awesome, and just like it was a very eclectic community and felt very much like, at home there. And okay, there was even a beat poet who went to that church. You might know him, Bradley Hathaway.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, because I had gathered you were kind of like in the emo scene a little bit, so I thought you might have
I remember
known
that
Bradley.
too. Yep.
Um, but anyway, so that was like a big part of my formation. But then that church just kind of dissolved when I was in junior high, I guess. And then my family found a more progressive evangelical non-denominational church. I don't think they would have even called themselves evangelical. There's a thing about like these progressive evangelical churches, they kind of don't want to be called evangelical.
Yeah.
even even though they absolutely are. Um, but it was the kind of church that like gave out Rob Bell's book Velvet Elvis at the
Yeah.
door, and like very much in like the Rob Bell, um, Brian McLaren mold.
Hmm.
So that was for me, like in high school, we were a part of that. I mean, which I found like very, very interesting. And honestly, by the time I was in high school, like there were certain like tensions that I was feeling between just like being in a very secular context. I went to public schools and was like most of my friends honestly were uh agnostic or just like not into religion. Like I had a few friends who were Christian, but like most of my public school friends were like, kind of in the like the smart like AP, you know, lit mag kind of scene. So definitely like yeah, agnostic, or I had some friends who were definitely atheist. Um and so being in a more progressive evangelical church kind of helped resolve a little bit of tension in terms of like asserting things like non-exclusivity, the development of doctrine, you know what I mean? Like a
Yeah.
much looser
Hmm.
take on everything, a la Rob Bell, like
Yeah.
theology is a trampoline, not a brick wall,
Oh man, that's going back, dude. Are you my age? How old are you?
I am 35, so we're like
Okay.
5
Yeah.
years apart.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
very
That's
similar.
starting to hit.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah, 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 yeah. But okay, then I went off to Missouri, went to Mizzou for college, where my wife and I met. I found a church like in downtown Columbia that was part of Acts 29. Had no reference to Acts 29 at the time, but just loved the people there. And it was a small church. I feel much more comfortable in like small church settings. Um, I thought it was cool because they would like drink beer during small
Hmm.
groups. They were,
Yeah. I still think
which
that's
is like
cool.
much more of a Midwestern thing. They don't have like the Southern Baptist baggage. Uh, but there were definitely aspects I was, learning like from kind of the Acts 29 thing that was like a little I don't know about that. Especially, when it came to like teachings around Genesis and creation and kind of gender role stuff. I was really kind of like coming up against the like whole gender role kind of stereotypes, kind of fitting, men and women into boxes. But I mean, the community was awesome, loved people there. And my wife and I met when we were both freshmen at Mizzou. She's from Central Arkansas, actually.
Okay.
I'm not going to name the town, but anyway, offline we can talk more about it.
Sure.
Uh, but anyway, so I met the Central Arkansas girl up in Missouri. We fell in love and got married actually the summer after my sophomore year. So I was 19, she
Ooh.
was 20 when we got married, which uh like threw my parents for a loop.
Mm.
I think her family had like a little easier time accepting it. Uh it took my my parents a little bit of getting used uh to accept that, their 19-year-old was getting married. But it was something where we just knew like we needed to spend the rest of our lives together. And there's definitely like a real strong spiritual connection. We were both going to this Acts 29 church, had just like really really strong, like, kind of small group community, good premarital counseling. It definitely, like, there was an implicit assumption in that church, if you're in a relationship, the goal is marriage, so it's like, why wait? But also, honestly, it was like, to be totally honest, like, movement of the spirit in me, I wasn't expecting to get married in college, and
Mm.
it's like, this is the one. So why wait? So, um, we, anyway, yeah, we got married 2 years in, so finished the last 2 years of college together. Um, but again, like, it's this weird thing where we're in kind of like a little more kind of like moderately conservative Christian community, but then a lot of our friends in college were secular. My wife was like, she was getting a degree in women's and gender studies, so like, she she, she had a lot of like lesbian friends, uh, like in the more kind of artistic, progressive scene, and so I don't know. We've kind of ran against the current, like kind of in every sphere of our lives. Uh,
What's your background?
but
What's
then
your
in
school
anyway,
background?
what do you mean?
What's your schooling? What was your studies?
Yeah, so I ended up getting a degree in agriculture. I got really interested in farming in college. Like I started off as a photojournalism major, which was a big reason why I went to Mizzou. But then got involved in an urban ag project and just like fell in love with it. Um, I grew up in like a much more suburban context in Northwest Arkansas. Um, but just I don't know. There's something about like the rootedness of farming, you know,
Well, there's
that it
something
just like
you're hitting on with your faith too.
yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. It's all fractal, right?
Mhm.
um, that I felt like I'd have to learn how to grow food. Like this is what I
Mhm.
need to do in college. So I got an ag degree, like focused on sustainable ag. Kind of really interested in organic farming, fruit and vegetable production, that kind of stuff. And my wife ended up getting kind of like a gen ed degree. Um, After college, we moved to the River Valley. I got a job in Oklahoma on a farm, like an educational farm. They were doing like organic research and a lot of like workshops and education, um, which I love that job. It was awesome. But just the culture of the River Valley, like Arkansas, River Valley, Oklahoma, Arkansas, kind of like
Okie
you know what I'm talking
dokie,
about.
folk.
Like, kind of the Fort Smith area, it just was not a good fit for 2, young 20-somethings
A little bit
straight out of
yuppie.
college.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, um,
Fayette chill.
so we ended up yeah, we ended up moving back up to Northwest Arkansas, felt more like home, ended up going back to that church that I went to in high school, that, like, progressive, not denominational church, and was a really good fit for us at the time. Um, and I ended up getting a job at the university, and essentially like going to get my master's in horticulture, um, and master's in horticulture. Yeah. Um, and kind of made a life for ourselves, where we are now. We're able to buy land, like just 3 acres, but, had chickens and goats and a big garden and did the
Mhm.
whole small farm thing.
Yeah.
My wife my wife's, well, she was a blogger, like, kinda translated into Instagram, as Instagram got more prevalent, but we did, like, farm workshops at her place and, uh, sold plants, sold produce, sold eggs, kind of, on a very small scale, while I was in grad school, but during like, to kinda link back to faith, we were in this, progressive, non-denominational church. I was starting to lose my faith. I think for reasons of just being like saturated in a very like scientific materialist kind of framework. Um, as a grad student getting a master's of science, even though it was in horticulture, it was very much like, an empiricist kind of worldview, which I just kind of like imbibed, and it just like bled. It was a process of disenchantment. That's the best way to put it. Um, I became like I developed a very disenchanted worldview, and just like faith didn't make sense. And in our church context, we visited some other churches. I I visited we have an Eastern Orthodox church up here. And visited that church, and then like a Hindu temple, a Jewish synagogue, and I was just really thrown off by like what felt like kind of those similarities between like a Hindu temple, the Eastern Orthodox church, like all the imagery, the symbolism, the smells and bells
The
kind
shape,
of
the color
stuff.
palette.
Yeah, yeah. Like, yeah, the colors, like for me coming like from Methodist to then evangelical, I was like, what like what is this? Which led me to explore early Christianity, and then that led me to like explore a lot of world mythology, see the similarities between, the Christian story and then other world myths. Kind of the savior on a tree, the rebirth, the baby in a basket, all that stuff. And I had no context for that. You know what I mean? So my takeaway was, well, I mean, obviously Christianity is just another myth, right? I mean, if it has all these similarities with all these other myths, then it's got to be, I guess, just one of these other
Postmodernism,
myths.
complete relativism.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I discovered Bart Ehrman, you know him?
Hmm.
And so like his kind of telling of like the historical Jesus stuff, historical criticism. I just did not have any like defense for that. Uh or anyone to kind of show me a different way to take it. So it just totally deconstructed my faith.
When was this?
Um so when I was in grad school, in like 2013 to 2016, like that period of time.
I wanna make a caveat in here.
Yeah.
With the limited information you gave me from your email, I incorrectly and it maybe inappropriately presumed that you were a lot younger than you were, and by just having kids, and so and I'm putting some 2 and 2 together, no no pun intended, but, like, making there's some things making sense there. And then so I was like, "Yeah, give it some time, man. This is a slow journey." And you're like, "No, okay, sorry." So I kind of feel a little embarrassed. And then 2,
It's all good.
uh, to break in there is like, have you been following the Brendan Graham Dempsey kind of corner stuff?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's man, he's been so fascinating to me. I would
Well,
honestly love
that's
to
where
talk
you're
to him.
like
We are the
right
same
there.
age.
Yep, yep, yep.
Yeah, yeah. We're the same age, and there's so many touchstones I heard like from his background. I mean, even like listening to DC Talk and like Newsboys and stuff like that. I'm like,
Yeah,
yep,
man.
that was me. uh but okay.
So
Here's
you're
here's
getting
the thing though.
with the source criticism, Bart Ehrman, and
Yeah,
then
yeah, yeah.
you're losing your faith, and everything's a relativistic thing. You're already an open person, but then it's like now I don't even know if where I can put my faith. It's all relative.
Yeah, yeah, but because of my personality and kind of who I am temperamentally, like the bottom didn't totally fall out. Like I always felt like there was some kind of like foundation, like a philosophical foundation. Um is the best way I can put it. So I was searching for that. There's got to be a common thread. Kind of like well, if it's not just Christianity, there's got to be like, a religion that's not a religion, like some kind of spirituality that all these things are like tapping into. There's got to be something, like I didn't totally dismiss any kind of overarching
Ultimate,
reality,
ultimate
or
truth.
transcendent truth.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But it made me like I was looking for it other places. Um, but yeah. So let's say picking up, um, yeah. So I in that context, like I found Sam Harris and got really into Sam Harris, less on like the militant atheist side, but more on there's his book he wrote on.
The
I think
moral
it was Waking
landscape,
Up.
waking up. Yeah,
No, The Waking Up
yeah.
was one because I was like, "Oh, like spirituality without religion," I think is a subtitle. It's like, "Oh, that actually really appealed to me." Um, because I kinda couldn't believe this whole religion thing anymore. Um, anyway, so I was in that kinda scene, that kinda Sam Harris, kinda like, IDW, just to kinda paint the picture, you know, like the Weinstein
Mhm.
brothers, I think were very, very interesting to me. Um, but uh, it was actually through kind of the whole like Tim Ferriss, kind of like productivity scene,
Yeah.
self-help scene that like I heard about Stoic philosophy. So I got really into Stoic philosophy because again, I was looking for some kind of foundation, right? And Stoicism, I think, like gave me enough of that felt like, how do I put it? It was outside Christianity, so I could, you know, kind of like accept it, take it for what it was. And allowed me to start thinking about like virtue ethics, concepts of wisdom, development of the self. And in that context, then it was actually through Tim Ferriss as well. He turned me on to Jordan Peterson, like Jordan Peterson's Genesis lectures. So that again, I mean, that would have been like around maybe it was 2018, 2019, something like that. Uh, and I was already primed because I had been reading like Joseph Campbell, Hero with a Thousand Faces, kind of like getting into like a mythological way of thinking and finding meaning there. And Jordan Peterson just kind of
It bridged the
he
gap.
grabbed
Yeah.
all those things and then applied it to the Bible, to Genesis, like the least likely place I would have expected to see all those things coming together. And he just opened up the Bible for me. Like he made me think that I could find something in this text again, you know, which I had kind of like thoroughly kind of deconstructed and thrown out. Um so anyway, that was the thread.
That's how.
And
Yeah,
then,
man.
of
That's
course,
how
like
we got
the
here. I should have started there, man. I was getting so self-conscious as you told this story, and I was like, "Damn, what were you doing?" I don't know what I was doing. I was trying to, like, help you instead of listen to you, and so I apologize. Um,
No, you're fine.
but
Yeah, no, you're fine.
but I love that. I mean, that's the theme in a way. That's it. And I mean, in my personal life, like, trying to explain even in my marriage, like, 'cause the world sees or is presented in certain aspects a Jordan Peterson that is this, and it's a real part of him. But, like, how is it that he like, certain things that he did radically changed people even 6, 7 years ago, it's still having a true effect in their life, you
Oh
know?
yeah.
And so
Yeah.
so, I mean, that's really cool the way that you laid that out, and it's really interesting having the conversation with another person. That that theme that Brendan Graham Dempsey brought into the space, like as a voice about like the source criticism in this conversation with, uh, with Peterson in a way. And part of me, though, it was funny because you said it was so surprising that it was Genesis that is because I've had this intuition that it was culturally the new atheist thing really was so tied with Dawkins to evolution, and that
Yeah,
was
yeah,
so
yeah.
radically tied to culturally to the modern attempt to square biblical literalism with history. that it created that was such the intellectual tension for many young people getting into college and that whole thing.
Yep.
And
Yep.
he took it and he made it like you said, he kind of made it make sense, that you could be totally cool with the Weinsteins and everything, and then be like, and be totally cool with God and the Bible, totally cool. But you know what I mean, like
Oh,
God and
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
Bible and
yeah,
Jesus,
yeah, 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 yeah.
and I think that even though the source criticism stuff, which it did kind of like you said, it deconstructed your faith. When I look at it culturally, I see that's kind of where the kind of the big idea landed. But it's interesting to hear that that was a big part of the undoing, in as part of your story in this space. And so then, you started now on that journey of gathering back up your faith, and you're 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 at an evangelical church, and so how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, yeah. So, uh, yeah, at the time I was losing my faith, we were still going to this progressive church. I was kind of checked out. My perspective was I could get a good moral lesson, like I have relationship with these people. It's meaningful. This is my community. I can get something from the sermon, even if I don't believe in the resurrection.
Mm,
Um, but then there were some kind of more like relational issues that affected my wife. Um, that then really left a bad taste in her mouth. And so for her, she was ready to leave. And like I said, I was kind of already checked out. Um, and so that was the final straw. So we just stopped going to church. Um, I wish I knew what year that was. I mean, again, like around, I don't know, 2016, 2017, something like that. Um, but yeah, so me finding Jordan Peterson and like developing an interest in the again, like this was outside of any kind of church context. We weren't going to church at the time. Uh we were just doing our thing like with our farm and our business, and pre-children. Um and So it was Peterson that then, led me to Vervaeke and Pajot, and um I think it was like the philosophy of Vervaeke just like really got me into like the history of Western philosophy and just understanding that, like kind of situating myself in that context, like that timeline. I really didn't have much of a reference for like where I sat in terms of the timeline of Western philosophy. So that got me on this like, kind of philosophy kick. And then just I, I I'm a very visual person. Like I mentioned, I started college for photography, and I think the the visual aspect of the symbolic world and iconography just really made sense to me.
mm,
Like it just added like another dimension to Christianity, and it gave me, it was like a vocabulary of mental images that I could then use to make sense of these ideas. And so that aspect of, Pajot and the whole symbolic world was like really important for me. And also, I started to make sense of, okay, this Eastern Orthodox church that we went to, this is why it looked like this, and this is why early Christianity looked the way it did. And it was really then, I mean, encountering C.S. Lewis again, which I have to
mm.
give credit to Paul Vanderklay, in this whole, you know, Jordan Peterson scene. Somehow I found Vanderklay, and like he turned me on to C.S. Lewis, and he had, a series of videos on C.S. Lewis. So I watched those and then kind of like listened to all the C.S. Lewis books on audio. Um, because this was when we had just had our twins. So I was at home a lot, like
Yep,
watching my boys sleep or bottle feeding them.
yep.
So I had plenty of time to listen to audiobooks. And so I just did a deep dive into C.S. Lewis. And then, encountering his biography and seeing a lot of myself in his story, it really did something, and even just the way C.S. Lewis was able to, it's kind of like a move like Jordan Peterson, where he like sidesteps that whole conflict between like modernism and faith, and he's able to like sidestep the conflict and provide some kind of resolution, like Jordan Peterson did for Genesis and evolution. Like,
Mhm.
to me, C.S. Lewis did that for almost like reason and faith,
Yeah.
you know? Like you can be like a rational person and be a Christian.
Yep.
Like I didn't know how to do that. But before I found C.S. Lewis, and since then I found, so many other examples of that.
How would
But
you
uh
say
but
how would you say that you because this is the Brendan Graham Dempsey question. How does the historical criticism fit into that piece for you now? Where does it land?
oh my gosh. His questions. Like I was listening to his conversation with Luke Thompson.
Yeah.
Have you listened to that one?
Mhm.
Some of his questions, it's like, whew, I don't know. Uh like if none of this ever happened, would it be meaningful? I think for me, there's a way in which I still think the historical reality is very important, but it's not the only thing that's important. And there's a way in which like my faith is so much stronger now because these aspects of Christianity are just true. Like it's become just, this is just reality. And I think Pajot has been so good at helping me see this. This is just the pattern of the world we live in, like death and rebirth. Um or, losing your life so that you can find it. Like that is reality,
Yeah,
you know.
and that's the
So,
sacrifice, yeah.
yeah, s- so in some ways it's like it's so much a part of like what I see as the fabric of reality, like the truths in Christianity, that the historical claim, even though I believe it, I affirm it, I believe like I've come back to a belief in like a physical resurrection. But if for some reason there's some kind of historical evidence that puts that into question, it's almost like, yeah, but if I live this way, my life is better. like like gravity exists. I mean,
Yeah,
if someone tries to disprove like whatever theory we have for gravity, like if I drop something, it's still gonna fall. Like it doesn't change that fact.
mm, that's a
That's
great
how that's just how like Christianity has become for me. So I'm just really so grateful for for all these people.
mm.
Anyway.
That it fits somewhere on a hierarchy of value, but it doesn't fit near the top.
Yes, absolutely.
It's
Yeah, yeah,
there, and I'm not you
absolutely.
don't have necessarily arguments with it or any, parts of it or whatever. It
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because maybe something like because history is like the science of history is what it is. It's the science of history, and that is, as powerful as certain aspects of science are, it it's kind of still a reflection of humanity in a ways, and it kind of and we accept that for what it is. I don't know. I'm making that up off the top of my head, but
Yeah, yeah, it's something like that. I think, yeah, like it's an important aspect of my kind of my religious journey as well, is there's like a certain amount of reaction against progressive Christianity in my history, just because like we were a part of this like I'm just gonna call it, Rob Bell Church. um that it no longer exists. Like that church deconstructed itself.
yeah.
Like at this point it's become just kind of like a separate club, movie club. Every now and then they'll do something, and my parents are still a part of it.
Mm.
And it's like you start you start taking apart your house, like one 2x4 at a time, and eventually there's nothing left. Or you're like trying to seek shelter, under a shingle.
Mm.
Um, and so I see the dangers in taking deconstruction that far. I think, which to me that educates how I view this kind of historical criticism, because I see how people who've gotten too detached from that, from that, like, that thread of Christianity, like, they've got nothing. Like, there's kind of nothing left. So, in some
As
ways, I
far
think,
as
faith has to
religion,
touch ground.
there's no religion left. There's no
Yeah.
could be, and we try to then supplement with culture or politics. But
Yes, 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 yes.
that's part of a stack, and religion's up here, and culture and politics are here. Or if you want to invert it into like a depth of meaning, vice versa. It's like, and I mean that's where you're finding me, in this year that we're in. Like I'm just kind of, I mean, I spent a lot of years putting politics above that or below, inappropriately above or below that space or something, or culture even sometimes, and so that makes a lot of sense. And it's
Yeah, yeah, I mean, one thing that, if you don't mind me interrupting, just you
tough.
mentioning, like, all you have left is culture or politics. I just I just have to put a pin in that point, because the guy who started this, progressive church, like, he does now is progressive politics. Like, he he left being a pastor, and he now runs a, political action, group for the Democratic Party
Mm.
in the state of Arkansas. Like that. So I'm like, obviously he's found out that politics is the most important thing for him, right? But that's
Well, I mean,
I
to take it to almost a grief and and a seriousness on the fact that like an ideology doesn't care for you, a pastor cares for you. That's the job of a pastor is pastoral care, spiritual care. Not and I will dog a little bit on Protestantism because it allows for this idea in a way all places do or something. But like, well, the message, it's the message, and I think that well, if this is the most important message in society, then that's my job now. It's not the person, it's not this flock in a way, I guess.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
to care for this flock, and I've got to get the legislation passed, and that'll take care of the ails of society or something. I don't know, but
Hmm.
that's a
Hmm.
thought on that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I mean, I definitely resonate with you with, like, being too attached to kind of, like, try to find the right political ideology, or, like, my proper stance in the culture. And I'm like, I think this is where this little corner has just been so grounding for me, because it just puts things in their proper place where, I mean, hey, we're all united. We're all united in Christ, whether or not someone recognizes it or not. But um, it's like, in some ways, like, the pursuit of this, this ultimate truth, the divine logos, like, that's what we're all after, right? A relationship with truth, which is, Jesus Christ.
And even in that,
And
oh, sorry, go ahead.
well, and then on the political level, it's like Christ is king, right? So
Mm.
then what are the political ramifications? I don't know totally, like, how does that land in our particular time and place, but
Well, there are,
broadly speaking, Christ is king, so it's going to be okay.
yeah. I think where do we? I forgot what I was holding on to there, but so, but now so you've reacted some against that, and now you've landed in this space, a more socially conservative, but it also there's like community and these things, but you feel the question that I guess we met on though is like, well, okay, here I am now, and you said in the email like, how do I take these treasures or make these treasures of the Christian history like help them be real in my church or something, or I don't know. Is that what you're?
Yeah, for me, I think it's a matter of it's integration. Um, because I think this will make it really really concrete. I I got super excited with like John Mark Comer, coming out with this new book. What Practicing the Way? Isn't that the title?
Mhm. Yep.
And then like his conversations around kind of spirituality, spiritual practices, like the spiritual journey, because honestly, everything he's talking about and trying to pull into the evangelical world, like this is why I feel like I have turned to Catholicism, because that Catholicism is something like an ark or a container that has preserved all the treasures of like spiritual maturity, spiritual development. Like for whatever flaws it has held on to these practices, these devotions, like I spent some time learning about like, contemplative prayer, a la Saint Ignatius. As I mentioned, the rosary has been like really, really important to me. Um, especially in terms of dealing with like depression and anxiety that I've
Mm.
felt recently.
Oh,
Um,
man.
and yeah, anyway, so it's there, like it's there in the Christian tradition, like within the container of Catholicism. I think a thing that I love seeing happening with John Mark Comer is he's opened up that chest and is like pulling things out. And I think in some ways I feel like I'm almost waiting for the downstream effect of that to like hit my specific church. I mean,
Mm,
people in our church are reading Comer and are like
mhm.
kind of excited about it, but I'm kind of like just waiting for it to be it to be permissible to like really be talking about these things. Because you
Co
know how it is in the
Comer
evangelical
by
world, like you
yeah.
have to have an influencer like Comer to give people permission to do something that's like kind of Catholic.
Mhm. I think it's possible that there's a lot more people in your church that don't know how to have this conversation, that might
It's
already be
possible.
listening to. They might be co-lurkers,
They might be. They might be.
like that kind of, or Peterson and Peugeot listeners that you may not be aware of. Some of the biggest players in the TLC are tradesmen, craftsmen. They're not academic intellectuals. And so I don't know. Sometimes when we look across the landscape and we can make assumptions about where people might be at, and like be surprised that there's like my mechanic and my barber are people that are more into this than anybody else I know in my town. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and so
Y-
um and the other piece I would say for your church and specifically is I do know a pastor that's in that network that about a year ago I was surfing Facebook. I became his friend again on Facebook, and he was quoting things of Augustinian prayers, and so I actually messaged him. I was like, "Dude, what are you doing?" Because I knew the context, and it was speaking a signal to me. And
It's a dog whistle.
yeah, I was like, and he goes, "Well, I think they're doing like a reading of the word and kind of like a scriptural call to worship, and they share the same uh, they share the same name of your church."
Yeah, yeah,
So I don't know if
yeah,
that would
yeah.
quench the thirst, that you're seeking in a way, but it's part of being on a journey, and part of me telling you that is that I don't know if it'll catch up to the one where your specific thing, but I think as a whole, the meaning crisis is coming to Arkansas in a serious way soon. And a lot of these people that we talk to in this space are from, I've had conversation couple of people from New York. I'm having conversations with people from, Wisconsin. Um, and these things have already washed through a lot of those spaces. But I think that because of the nature of the internet, these things are not so far behind as they used to be, trends and that all that kind of stuff. And I mean, it's so. the churches are gonna, even the big mega churches are gonna have to contend with this um, more directly. So, and I think that some of them are probably having these conversations, but these aren't conversations that they're going to bring out to the pulpit or talk to even all their small group leaders about, you know. So,
Yeah, 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 and I think one thing that made me really gun shy with all this was, like, you know, kinda getting really excited about, like, finding a church community, getting baptized in that church, like,
mm,
rebaptized,
mm,
and then, like, looking for, like, a spiritual mentor, being recommended a guy by my pastor, meeting with him, and then, one of the first things he tells me is, like, he used to be Catholic, but he doesn't think Catholics are Christian.
mm,
Um, and I'm like, "Okay, I'm not gonna talk about that." And then, a subsequent meeting, he's, telling me that, like, in Genesis where it says, day, that means a 24-hour period,
mm.
and that's just what it means. And I'm like, "Okay, that's what you believe." But,
Yeah.
it's just like I just this is also my temperament. I don't wanna have arguments with people who I'm not gonna convince them. I don't It's not my job to convince them.
Oh,
But I think in some ways it's like I honestly hate the word safe space, but I think where it's relevant is just, like, feeling like the context I'm in is an appropriate place to, like, have these conversations. And I just for me, it's like trying to find that context, which exists, here. That's why I reached out to you, because I know we can talk about these things. I just have not found, like, people in my church who for have given off, the bat signal, the dog whistle, the pheromone, whatever, where I'm like, I can actually talk to them about these things.
mm.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. I've been in a real blessed space. Like I've been in a liminal space for a very long time. Uh,
yeah.
and and my buddy that I did meet that came to our church that was Catholic became my best friend, and he talked about his time in the Catholic Church like his candlelight dinner with Jesus, and I had to figure out what that meant, you know. So it's like, but he was at the evangelical church,
Yeah.
you know. So there, and his wife was cradle Catholic, and they were looking for certain things during that season of their life that weren't at Saint so and so's down the road. So you know, I don't know. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I will say, like, I've found people, uh, who I can talk about stuff like this too. Like, I've got a philosophy club. We just finished reading Plato's Republic, and we have great conversation, and, like, also found someone who's going to the local Orthodox church, and she's really into Pajot and Vervaeke and all that. Uh,
what about
it's just
estuary? Have you considered trying to do an estuary
yeah,
in
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah,
area?
yeah. No, I would honestly love to get your input on that. We should yeah. I
Might
would
be a
love
good
to, like,
one.
host yeah, I would honestly love to see that happen, which is kind of what I was trying to do with the philosophy group, but I think something a little more open-ended and less intimidating, like, where
Well,
you don't
think
have to
about
read
this.
2 books of the Republic before you come.
Think about this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, but I would love to do that, and I think
Estuary is a
honestly
dog
a big
whistle.
what's that?
Estuary is a dog whistle, and if you put out so if you put out, you know, a Facebook group or made it a live so that someone's on Estuary Hub in Northwest Arkansas, and then that actually, I mean, as long as it gets going and it has a tab on estuaryhub.com,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that a philosophy club might attract someone that might be interested in estuary, but someone that's specifically interested in estuary is likely bumped into some of these people.
Oh,
So I don't know,
absolutely.
to
Yeah,
help.
yeah. Oh, no. I think that's a great idea. And just another wrinkle is, like, we're about to have another set of
Oh
twins,
yeah,
so
that old thing.
it's a little hard to be like, "Oh, yeah, I'll just,
Commit.
take on another, responsibility." But I think I really appreciate your perspective, all that. And I think for me, it's just like a lot of it's just like the fear of rejection,
Mhm.
honestly, which I think it's like I I don't want to lose this church community we found, you
Mm,
know. And I don't want like my weird eccentric intellectual pursuits to somehow jeopardize mine and my wife's, standing in
mm,
our community. Like these are sensitive things.
yeah.
Uh yeah, anyway, so that's another aspect, but I think patience. And yeah, again, like participating in conversations like these when I'm able is like
Yeah.
so meaningful and nourishing.
Yeah, it
Um
is, and that's why I'm here, dude, because that's why because I have those same I'm a high in openness, but low in, whatever the, confrontation version of that
yeah.
is,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and so it was like I was having this conversation in my head for 7 years, like, I was like, I gotta get it out," and so I think
Yeah.
that there's so much reality to that, and the practice of it, and the vulnerability of it, because there's a chance that it might would be hard. Say you see somebody that kind of, maybe they're not listening to all the same people, but you hear them say like, I was watching some videos on orthodoxy, and you would be that happen to go to your church or something. You could say, hey, I was on this weird podcast. This stuff's kind of weird, but check out this conversation, and you can just toss that to them. You can toss it to them, and they can listen to the conversation and be like, "Oh, yeah, there were some things in there," or like, "I went and checked out this Jonathan Peugeot guy," and then they started, and it's not that they're gonna come at the conversation at 60 miles an hour like we can, but they could, like, start, because that's kind of what's happened here for me with some relationships.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. So maybe
Yeah.
this
Yeah. Yeah.
could help that in a way. I don't, maybe.
Mhm.
But you've got your
Mhm.
story in here, which for someone, even if they would land on a different kind of space with, say, biblical literalism or something. If I was a Christian, even in that way, and I hear this person almost basically lost their faith, and they're like, Jesus is the way, and I believe in the resurrection, that would challenge my perceptions about maybe what they believe about evolution or something, because it's like, oh, and that still might be hard to have that conversation, but you could, like I said, hey, people out there, if you're listening to this conversation in, 6 months from when it took place, this guy's been through the ringer in his faith, like, and he's taken it very seriously. So I don't know, man. That's kind of that, because that, I mean, yeah, I don't feel like I mean, I had a conversation yesterday with a guy who's a associate pastor at a church in our town, and it's a Baptist church, and we've been friends for a very long time. I don't know if I would, without already kind of putting myself out there for the last 4 months. I found myself in a conversation with him for the first time in a very long time, and and we start talking about some things, and he starts kind of hinting that, that he has had some deepening or evolution in, not evolution, but an evolution in his faith that makes him a lot less certain and makes him a lot less dogmatic in certain ways. And so it was like this really beautiful conversation. And then and the guy that was with us that he came hang out with is this guy that's really exploring orthodoxy, but he goes to a Cumberland Presbyterian church with his wife, and because that's what makes sense to their family. And so then I told him, "Yeah, I'm doing this podcast. It's weird because this other guy had listened to a few episodes, and he was like, I told my friend, I was just like, man, you might hear some things on there that maybe even verge on heresy, honestly. And the whole idea is that I'm trying to just talk about this stuff, and it's hard to know where to talk about this stuff."
Yeah. Yeah.
And there was a really gracious, response to that, and I think that because it's coming, man. And at when we get closer to that 40, a lot of us maybe we don't want to admit it, but we're a lot less certain about things, and maybe that's why we get more angry about trying to latch on to politic or something. But like, it's because we're even less certain about the future than we were when we were 20, and there I think there can be some grace there. But I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm just giving you like the real world examples of what this has been doing for me. Just even starting to have more of these conversations. So I don't know if that's helpful. But are you still there? Did I lose you? Oh man. Do. Luke, we've lost your signal. Here he comes. Here he comes. Maybe.
On my end?
Yeah, I don't know. I stayed going, but yeah, man, we're good. I don't know what the last
Okay.
thing you heard on that long-winded monologue I was on, but this story about meeting with friends and pointing them back to conversations and just being like, there might even be things I'm trying to work things out, you know?
Yeah. 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 No, and I'm really encouraged by your just kind of seeing you put yourself out there. I think that that's a great example, and kind of like just having the courage to kind of be, I don't know, almost like stake a position, or um I
Stake a
don't know, have
non-position.
public conversations, not position. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, but I think it's kind of that, it's probably at the end of the day, it's like a vulnerability,
Yeah.
and like uh yeah, like a fear of rejection, I think is what it, you know, is what it comes down to.
Mhm.
Yeah, what one thing that that just really resonated with me, that I've heard like Luke Thompson say several times, is that disagreement's okay, but schism is not okay.
Mm.
And I think I have just seen enough examples of like conversations like this, or people questioning things leading to some kind of schism or like a break in relationship. I don't think it's worth it. Uh, even does that make sense? Like the relationship's more important, but I don't know. It's just
Yeah.
like like just finding the right context to be able to talk about these things. Understanding that at the end of the day, like, I think this is my position. At the end of the day, I'm okay with someone else having like an exclusive perspective on their own version of Christianity. I don't share that, but I'm okay with them having an exclusive take on their brand of Christianity, because I think it's so much bigger than that.
It only goes
Does that
one
make
way.
sense?
The the wider the net only goes one way though. And so it is harder to have that conversation if you're going to come to that. But the other part about it is, and I think what part of what this corner is trying to do is also, can we model that, the disagreement without schism thing, and kind of getting into a place of learning how to play, because the big ideas with Christian universalism and even Unitarianism. I don't know if you've bumped into Sam Tiedman in this space.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so
absolutely,
like
yeah,
so like it's like this, and then obviously Paul's a Calvinist pastor, Reformed pastor, and it's like, you know, that's kind of the meta thing, and exemplifying that, and even then doing this, which is partially embodying it, and um, and there's something too, even just starting like practicing this conversation. I call these things conversation craft because I
yeah.
mean, we lost some ability to know how to approach like a sensitive or a heavy or deep topic in a way like in our embodied lives, um and we've sat around for 7 years listening to Joe Rogan do it and listening to Dax Shepard do it and listening to, but we have been trapped in the headphone space of doing it, and so
Yeah.
it I think that's another part of this. And I mean, doing actually, I've done years of online therapy, and it actually was helpful. I mean, that's why I'm partially why I feel like I'm able to operate like this, um, because of that. And that was a practice, and it was a practice of vulnerability. Hopefully, it was a practice of honesty and wrestling with and getting things that are deep inside of you out. And these are some of the deepest things that we're talking about in this space, you know? And
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
Yeah. No, that's so good. And I mean, just to provide some some more context, like,
Sure.
uh, yeah, it's crazy how divisive some of these things can be. Like
Mm,
um, when I started reading Jordan Peterson, I wanted to have like a book club to like talk about Jordan Peterson, and this was when his 12 More Rules for Life Beyond Order
mhm,
came out, and so I just posted on Facebook. I was like, want to start a book club to have deep conversations. Thinking about starting off with Jordan Peterson Beyond Order, and uh, essentially the reaction I got from some of my friends, knowing my context, was, "Well, don't you know he's a transphobe?" And my this is another wrinkle. My sister is married to a trans man, and essentially the whole fallout just from me reading Jordan Peterson and having a
mm,
book club about it,
mm,
and not being like, "Oh, you're right, he's a transphobe. I should not pay attention to him." Like, the whole fallout from that was that they would not talk to me anymore.
man.
Like, I wasn't allowed to, come over to their house.
Mm,
Uh, it it is insane what happens, when just like a conversation like this touches on someone's nerve. I mean, I had another friend, like, he was my best friend growing up, who was very concerned because I was reading Jordan Peterson, and like, he's like, "Well, are you listening to Ben Shapiro?" I was like, "Yeah, he has some ideas I agree with, not everything." And essentially, like, there was a huge falling out with that too.
oh,
So,
man, yeah.
I mean, and of course, this was like, 2020, when freaking everyone was so amped up. But
And we all
I
lost our
don't know.
mind. I think we all lost
I
our
am
mind.
just, yeah, we all kind of did. But I'm very gun shy, I think,
Mhm,
from those experiences.
yeah.
And I think TLC is just such a beautiful model of, people being able to have like really productive conversations, and even like, even kind of in real time, reconcile, um, and put kind of relationships above the ideas, relationships above politics, relationships above religion. So yeah,
Well,
I agree.
yeah, I'm thinking about some more context, even just, what Northwest Arkansas attracts within the state as a reputation. So, and then
Oh yeah, it's a blue island. I mean,
yeah,
it's a blue island.
and then uh that the intense feelings. I think this journey is taking steps to attempt to overcome the very thing that you're talking about. I haven't shared this podcast on my personal Facebook. I have not shared this podcast on my Instagram.
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
and it's not that I won't, but, maybe I'm trying to practice this craft a little bit more before I feel like I wanna try to have it. And the other piece is but there's people in my like, my father-in-law has been listening to him. Like I said, I've got, like, my barber there's it's not like I would be alone, like, I don't know who I would go to, and on the other, I found out yesterday that someone, and it's not because of this stuff necessarily, but doesn't think I'm a Christian. Uh, it's actually not directly related to these things. It's related to the church that we used to go to, but you know, uh, and and I'm like, at the end of the day, which another part of our story is, you know, eh, is that like my most the thing that I was most deeply ashamed of in my life, everyone in our whole town found out about. And so like I've had a little different journey in what it means to operate with something that's deeply embarrassing or controversial, like whatever that thing is that we're kind of hitting on. But at the same time, like I said, like the other piece of it is that Facebook has tended to be. I mean, I think that people have like gotten tired of trying to be controversial on Facebook, at least in my little sphere of it, and maybe not other places, but it's like, golly, because the post COVID hangover of like, gosh, we're all kind of tired in certain ways of telling people they're wrong. Like, can we, from whatever angles, like we've been telling this people we're wrong constantly, and it has caused damage. It has, and so it has created an anxiety, and it's like, okay, well, let's just post pictures of concerts again, like we're 20, like surely you're getting some of that too, like, like,
Yeah, just go back to baby pictures.
yeah, yeah, but the same time, there's also this idea, this reality of needing to be known for
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah,
and you, we all, that's a part of the gospel, even, like, but it's like,
yeah,
but embodying that to be known about this part of my life that has caused, I mean, deep pain. And so even when I have let myself out there to be known, boy, that didn't go so well. Um, and that is painful. And I wonder, I think that even in the nature of so how do you even have, so say that situation with your sister and her partner, like that that if they, I don't know if they did, do they know, have they heard you talk for 30 or 45 minutes about your spiritual journey before?
no, no, no. I
And-
mean, when all this happened, I was still agnostic.
okay, so I would wonder if they were able to stomach listening to your personal story, because sometimes what happens when we don't know, when it's so personal, which was what's interesting about the screen, but when it's so personal, like my brother is a bigot. Wow, damn. That's like, and you can't even start the conversation. I think, like I can't even give context because it's just already um the trust has been broken without, and sometimes, this would be something that would be less personal to listen to my brother talking about his spiritual journey on somebody's stupid podcast that they could keep making fun of, or something, but like it would at least give context to something. Because it's hard. That's one of the beautiful things about what Joe Rogan did, even though he's fodder for the, he's a big conservative now, apparently, but it's like,
Oh, I'm sorry. You just mentioned Rogan, so that's gonna trigger them.
so
But
that's what I mean. The thing is, is here's the context. If anyone's hanging on, is like, go listen to him talk for 3 hours. Go listen to him talk. It's available for you to listen to him talk. First is the clip that was pulled for mainstream media for that was 30 seconds of his whole corpus of content. Like he has, and that, I think that's the thing. It's like, do you have the courage to listen? Do all of us have the courage to listen to somebody else talk for an hour about the things that are deeply personal, or 2 hours or something?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
Yes, that's so true. Yes, yeah, that's so good.
You let out a lot there. Are you okay?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. No, this has been awesome. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. There's so much more we could talk about. I'm like, oh
Well,
gosh,
what else? What
can't
do you got? Something else? I didn't make a big list for this one.
I think, yeah, the thing I'd love to hear more from you is like just tangibly in like the church community you're in. I would just love to hear more like what it looks like, and then what aspects of Christian tradition are just part of your, Sunday worship.
All right, I'll send you. I was going to do this for McMo too. I'll send you like we run liturgy off of Apple Notes off of a phone,
Okay. Uh-huh.
so that it's everything's on the scroll.
Uh-huh.
I think that there is That's more like everyone holding a hymnal that has the same notes than looking at the words on the screen. That's being
Yeah.
told by somebody else. There's something there that's a little bit of a tangent, but like I don't know, man. Um, I told you that I used to do like we were doing a pretty formalized type of historical liturgy, call and responses, confessions, creeds. Everyone was coming forward for communion, and the people holding the plates. This was at a non-denomination; it wasn't a Presbyterian church. Pardon me, but we instructed them to say the body and blood of Christ. No one had to believe it, but you know, our pastor was ordained Presbyterian actually, but we weren't a Presbyterian church. So, um, it's some. How do I want to explain this time? There's approaching. I think what I started to the way I started to frame it. I didn't even know I was doing it then, but I'll give you the example of coming forward for communion does something psychologically different than having it passed out. And the Protestant, very low church Protestant impulse is to say that none of that matters because it's the only thing that matters is this. So
Right.
that's kind of how my approach to historical forms of worship is actually coming from looking at it psychologically, I think. And that's very much from Peterson. Peugeot,
Yeah.
the symbolic part of it is there too, because I think part of that is psychological as well. But it's like, um, when and coming from it as a dude that did rock and roll worship for 15 years basically, when that was the impulse was don't let there be any quiet, don't let there be any like all these transitions smooth, and don't let there be any self-conscious nature to what's happening. And that was an implicit thing that we all kind of agreed on, but it wasn't like, well, why do we not want self-consciousness during worship or something? um, the idea that when say even a call to worship or but then a confession, especially if you're doing confessions and creeds or even the Lord's Prayer, but it's like that you're hearing the person to your left and the person to your right say the crazy things out loud. I believe in God. I believe in the virgin birth. I believe in the resurrection. I believe in the Holy Spirit. I believe that Jesus died and went to hell and ascended into heaven. Like that's saying the crazy parts out loud. And so it's not, that's also, there's an implied culture that even modern churches don't even realize anymore about what's driving their own versions of iconoclasm, which is not the idolatry. It's that these things might hinder people from hearing the gospel, like the religious imagery. And we're way past that now. But so the saying the weird stuff out loud is not very seeker friendly. But that's a whole different reason to not do it than because you don't think that doing something corporately is right or wrong. It's because it's not a seeker thing. I don't know. Does that make sense to you?
Oh yeah. No, I
Yeah.
absolutely. I'm
So
100%. I am tracking all the time. I think about the fact that in our church, um, we're worshiping God, but what is illuminated for me in the front of the room is a human being on a
okay.
guitar
Okay.
with the crosses on either side. And I mean,
Mm,
there was even a time where when I would worship, I would stare at the cross. So I was directing my worship towards that symbol, not the symbol of
yes.
a human, a rock star.
Yes. We will do it. We will do it regardless. Regardless of if we believe it's only spiritual, we will make that person consecrated and we will make them the arbiters of the sacrament or something.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I take this. That was another piece. Was like I bought this little cross
Yeah, I love it.
because it was like there's no religious imagery really in this house, and we actually ended up putting it in the middle with a candle. And so like this people that help do the liturgy are on the left, or if you're looking at it, are on the right. and the people that help with the music are on the left. But the little cross is, and our little candle is in the middle
Yeah.
on a table.
Yeah.
On a
Yeah.
table. We haven't actually done the Lord's Supper for probably a few different reasons, but so
Yeah. I guess what I'm curious about, like, the house church thing is so interesting to me. And there was a period of time when my family went to a house church. So I'm a little familiar. I'm just so curious how you feel bringing this like traditional liturgical sacramental into like a house church setting, which feels like it's a marrying of two very different worlds. And, especially in, like Orthodox, it's apostolic succession. In the Catholic Church, it's like the hierarchy of authority. Like you're outside of that. I How does all that feel to you?
well, I am at the heart of me have lived out a Protestant existence my whole life. So there's,
Yeah.
I mean, that's what is what it is. I haven't ever existed under those authorities, and I kind of crave that at this point in my life. So I don't see this as an ultimate existence. I think that that's the tell us of me and my family at some point. Um, so on that side of things, the other part is that this community isn't just like, oh, we're starting a home church, so let's go try to advertise that we're doing historical liturgy in a house church. That's like the last. It Our church basically kind of had something like the rise and fall of Mars Hill happen. I don't know if you tracked
Oh,
along with
okay.
that.
Okay. Yeah.
And as a result, a lot of people were very, very damaged.
I
And
see.
I've been at that church for 20 years almost, and had been a large portion of the church that was still there. I had been their worship pastor for 10 years.
Uh huh.
And for a period of that time, I was leading historical liturgy while doing Passion and Hillsong United stuff.
Yeah.
So that's not a foreign concept to a certain amount of people where I live. And that it was coming up on like the thing all fell apart like in the mid late fall of last year ultimately, and we had already been out for almost a year. We were kind of tip of the spear of the distrust that took place. So there was a group of a family approached me and my wife and said, "Should we do something? Like do
Uh huh.
something for Christmas is coming up, Advent's coming up." And our church had actually participated in some Advent and like Holy Week pretty seriously. We had incorporated aspects of the church calendar, and I was a part of a team that was really trying to like do that before I, betrayed the
Yeah.
trust of the church and everything. So, so it's not just like this was like a Facebook advertisement. Hey, there's this kind of church. It's like this is part of a church that had existed.
Yeah.
And so, and that there was a top down culture from myself and a couple of the pastors at that time that had infused that identity into a body of believers. And so
Mhm.
for me to take some of that and then actually like kind of incorporate more liturgy and have a liturgist so that it's not just me doing everything and still doing a lot of modern songs. I'm reaching back to doing like some interesting choruses from the 90s and like and hymns, like multiple, not just like have issues with just continuing to go forward, new song, hit song, hit song, blah blah blah. But like, yeah, it was that was already in the DNA. And then so like my in-laws who have this historical background, like when we did Lent this year, I asked them if they would like do a 10-minute before we started, kind of historical lesson on Lent before Ash Wednesday. And, you know, um, and then we did that for Advent too. We kind of had some explanation and we did all this stuff. And so I had prepared Holy Week services. I had prepared Advent, done like this wasn't, it's in the DNA. And then like the specifics of how my family came together, and having me being able to do that in that church was also a result of having a 10-year conversation with my in-laws about, explain to me paedobaptism again, and why is the liturgy so important to you? Why do y'all love that so much? And like I had been having that conversation, but I never like was wanting to just like jump ship to one of the historical traditions, because like being in that liminal space, I was having conversations like with my buddy who was Catholic and had it was a unique thing that
Yeah.
I'm think that I'm learning, that I thought it was just like, we're just kind of something, but then, a more robust liturgy, intention about even like, that psychological thing. There's psychology about lighting a candle. What is it? I mean, it's very ancient. It's very part
Hmm.
of our our huge human history. There's trying to value a little bit of religious imagery, and it's just about intent. It is a lot about intention, and and there was already a community that wasn't foreign to doing read and response, um, but we're also very evangelical. So I don't know if that answers your question. Uh,
Oh yeah, that provides so much context. Um, wow. Well, I think that's beautiful. I mean, what you've been able to participate in the development of.
well, yeah, and it's been there was almost a 7-year gap, because that part of the church had begun to wane too. The vision for that had gotten lost, and so they still did some things, but they hired like a worship pastor that came from like a charismatic background. Ultimately, several hires after me, and so there wasn't a value for a lot of that, and so that's the difference between being again in like a something where that values within the institution versus just like people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think this, man, when you were explaining it all, it really gave me the sense of this is kind of what like meta modern Christianity would look like. Because I think the thing that makes me very self conscious about kind of where I'm at, and almost like pulling things that have meaning out of other traditions, is it's almost like a self consciousness about like kind of picking and choosing. Like, is it just like a choose your own adventure faith? Um, especially when these traditional forms kind of assert certain exclusive, uh essentially they have exclusive claims on their own form of tradition. You know what I mean? Like,
Like Latin
it,
mass
it
and
al-
divine liturgy, is that what you mean?
yeah, it's almost like a well, how dare you take this from our tradition? This is part of some kind of like organic whole.
I'll I'll
It's
put a
not.
caveat
It's not.
into that. I'll put a caveat into that. This is without like, I don't know, I'm not going to use the word believe, but without like the recognition of apostolic succession. Like I've told you, the DNA of my wife's family and the DNA of her wife's family, like there's an authenticity um to that being a real part of our lineage,
Yeah, yeah.
which isn't succession per se, but like what is that succession preserving but a lineage to
Oh yeah.
not only, I mean, there's a spiritual preservation, with the Eucharist and stuff, but like that's a theological aspect of it, but like kind of an anthropological aspect of it, or a historical aspect of it, is like preserve, like we're actually like honoring like our histories in a way too,
Hmm.
which isn't to try to like justify anything. I just think that it's real because um my in-laws who are in their 70s are also asking questions about, the future of their life and how certain things will be taken care of, when a certain time comes in their life. You know, we don't have no one's getting paid to do this right now. So, or, no one's getting paid to do this. And,
Hmm.
and so, it's not a perfect thing, but and it's not suited to last. And I think that also has to be. I don't think it's right to think that it should be in a certain way. I think that it should be seen, or the way it should be seen is the way I see it. The way I see it is that this should go somewhere and should land
Yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah. Yes, yes. And I mean, you just talking about that kind of genealogical succession, like almost like a family legacy. I mean, one thing that for me has been really meaningful, just in myself exploring, say, like the Catholic tradition, is even learning about kind of the history of Catholicism in England. I'm mostly English. I have some Scottish. I mean, surely other stuff, but like anyway, mostly English. Like it's there, My people.
Yeah,
You go far enough, they used to be Catholic,
yeah,
and and in some ways, I mean, I've started to see the Reformation, especially how it expressed itself in England as a trauma, as a religious trauma, like the stripping of the altars
mm,
and essentially almost like the tearing down of these symbols and a way of life and a pattern to life that was very much part of the culture. And it's in some ways for me refamiliarizing myself with that feels like reaching back to my own past
and
and finding those treasures, which they are in me. I mean, this is the thing that I believe. I mean, it's like somehow that is in me because it was in my ancestry, and almost like in a universal history kind of way. um
yeah.
so I think that's such a good point, Christian. Christian, for
Well,
you it's like much more
I'm telling you, that
recent
was like
past.
speak from the hips. Like I just was like, as I'm thinking about this, actually,
Yeah, yeah, but there's a certain recovery, but I think it's like the recovery, how we recover tradition, the expression of that recovery is going to look different today than it did 1,000 years ago.
yeah.
It
Well,
inevitably has to. But I think the thing that you encourage me is that can be authentic and meaningful and not like a kind of cultural appropriation or religious appropriation,
mm,
because I think this is almost like hasn't this been happening from the beginning of Christianity? I mean, this kind of evolution and kind of like going back to the source, pulling that up, ressourcement, I think is like the fancy word for it. But I feel like what you're doing, what we're speaking to is almost like inevitable in
mm.
some ways.
Yeah, I definitely believe that because the one of the first things I started popping on here talking about was like that the digital is literally eating away the walls of the church. Like this the access to this information, digital information is tearing down the physical and even the doctrinal or the kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
orders. Uh, or more in a meta sense, really, it's like you look over and there's like, well, there's the confessions over here of that church. Here's the confessions over here. The walls don't exist anymore, and I see those and I
Yeah.
understand them. But I could probably just walk over there
Yeah.
and 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 be okay or something, because
Yeah.
um so that, yeah, there's definitely there's something to that I do think there's an inevitability, which is why I was kind of like, hold on, because you're like I want the meaning crisis so that we can all kind of which is kind of this Dempsey thing, so we can ascend past these archaic divisions and whatnot, and I get the meta thing is though to actually like look at them and then like understand them and appreciate them and see where wow. The reason I think so when I would get on, I started having these conversations with, and I've talked to quite a few Orthodox people, and McMosif, who I had this conversation with yesterday, he made a comment on one of them. He's like, I'm getting tired of all this high church talk and something, and I was like, well, let's talk about it, man. And the thing about it is, I don't think that I can recreate orthodoxy. I think what I'm trying to do is point at something like, you know, uh, Anglo-Catholic and like these high preserved meaning and Latin mass things, like, man, we should look at these and it might be good in some ways to try to orient ourselves towards these things, even if we can't figure out or it doesn't necessarily make sense to jump ship right now, which is what you're doing on a personal level. And so
Yeah.
that's part of it, is just continuing to walk that walk or practice the way, and John Mark Comer, and like and you will bump into somebody, but it is difficult. I mean, you've shared a couple of very difficult things, about your family and about even, hey, could be a good guy to disciple you at the church, and you're like, ugh. And it's like, well, this is, I keep bumping into the things that are painful. But we go through seasons of, that are more isolating than others. And I think that those, not that God makes that happen or something, but they can be used in your life for glory. I'm telling you, I mean, there's been an explosion of relationality since I started doing that, and from a season of very low relationality in my life, and not just on the internet, but in my world here. So, oh man, you have any other thoughts before we kind of wrap this thing up?
No, that's a great place to end. I'd love to talk more at a future date, but
yeah, man,
our boys' nap time is coming to an end, so I should probably
for sure go check on the littles.
go check on them.
I'm gonna bump us out with this little video, and we'll end this thing backstage. All right.
Okay.
Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.